There we go. Helps if you turn on the mic, Peter. This thing is working great. Our ladies are starting their Bible study next week, actually tomorrow night, I guess, Monday night, and it's going to be on Joseph. And so I was thinking about heroes of the faith, and I thought about Joseph, and I called Erin, and I said, what if I just kind of preach a quick overview of Joseph? And she said, I think that would be a wonderful introduction. So 10 chapters, more than 10 chapters are dedicated to Joseph in Genesis. We certainly are only going to touch on it a little bit. So I'm going to ask you to go home, read those 10 chapters, and if you're a lady, enjoy that ladies' study. That will be fantastic for you. A hush fell over the crowd. The elderly gentleman got up and began to make his way toward the podium. He was kind of heavy-set and waddled a little bit when he walked. As a matter of fact, someone had once described him as a Humpty Dumpty sort of a character. Can you envision him kind of struggling a bit as he walks to get up to the podium to address that crowd? What would he say? This man, who many felt was the reason that Western Europe was still free, how would he address, and what secret to life would he give to this audience who was waiting to learn from him? Finally, he was ready to speak. Let's pause and leave him there for a moment. Let me ask you a question. Did you have any dreams when you were younger? Any plans that you were excited about? Any vision that you felt like God had given you? Maybe for a godly family, for a joyful group of friends who supported each other unconditionally, for a church family where you could feel like you belonged. What were your dreams? And what has become of them now? Today is the 6th anniversary of one of my very dear friend's death from cancer. I held his hand while he passed away. I got to celebrate with his family as we knew he was in the presence of Christ. Friday this last week, my dad would have been 89. It was the first year that he wasn't on earth to celebrate with us. On Friday, I visited the hospital to visit a 20-year employee of my company who's also a friend, who just was told he may have stage 4 liver cancer. On that same day, my dog that is 13 and a half years old gave some signs that he won't be with us that much longer. Do you see how the pressures of life can bear down on our dreams? Are you at times so far from your dreams you can barely remember them, let alone be energized? Do you sometimes just feel like quitting? Or perhaps you know why you struggle. It's the way you've been treated by others. Don't we want to hold them accountable for what they've done to us? Isn't it tempting to let bitterness toward those who have hurt us fester inside? A story from the Bible. The handsome youth approached the group of men. He'd been searching for them for several days. The desert had been hot. He'd been sleeping out in the open, and now lines of sweat were running down his face. But he was happy to find the group he had been looking for. Unknown to him, his future was about to take a decided turn for the worse. As he walked up, men grabbed him by the arms, rushed him over to a giant pit, and threw him down into it. Unger's Bible Dictionary reveals a little about what that pit was. The Hebrew word bower meant a deep hole dug often for a well or cistern. In the winter or spring, these holes would fill up with runoff, which would then be used throughout the summer to water the flocks. The water was stagnant, and it would develop that green scum we've all seen on standing water. As that water level recedes, you can picture the bottom of that cavity kind of muddy and slimy still. Imagine what it would feel like to be pushed over the edge of that and fall about 20 feet and just land in the bottom of it. The rock is so slippery, there's no way you can get out. It kind of caves in above your head. Joseph is in that pit. Let's read the actual words that God tells us the story. Genesis 37:18 through 24. Joseph has been sent by his father to look for his brothers as they're shepherding far away from home. and they saw him from afar. Before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said, "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. They took him and threw him into a pit. Oh, the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Question, do you remember what Joseph's youth had been like? He was born the favorite son of a rich man. He was the most beloved of his brothers, and he has these vivid dreams that tell him he will someday be a mighty ruler. But when he shared those dreams with his family, his brothers mocked him and became bitter against him. Still, his father listened and wondered maybe what would happen. His father loved him, so he made him a beautiful coat of many colors that he took with him everywhere he went, and he had it with him when he was searching for his brothers. Now, don't miss this. Years later, with no sign of the promise coming true, Joseph had been obeying his father just before he was thrown into the pit. His brothers were jealous and angry, and they had determined to let him die. Arlene imagines one of those brothers leaning over the edge of the pit, brandishing the coat over his head and saying, "Try to jump, to climb, to shout. You have no hope and no way out. You've got yourself in quite a stew. We shall see who bows down to who. Oh, we'll just eat our lunch up here. Oh, there's no food for you, we fear. Then we will leave you there to die. Not one soul to hear you cry. There is nothing you can do, and Daddy isn't here for you. This ends the life you've always known. Your worth is as this filthy stone. We hate you, you swine, you cow. See if your God can save you now." The idea of going down to the pit in the Old Testament is sometimes used to denote dying without hope. To be cast into a cistern, we are told, was to face great discomfort and probable starvation. Joseph had had big dreams, but now he's facing a slow, torturous death alone in the pit. And don't forget, it was Joseph's brothers. It was his own family who had put him in this place. How do you think Joseph felt sitting in the bottom of that hole? Do you know there's a difference between being happy with your circumstances and trusting God no matter what happens to you? And there is a good reason to keep our hope fixed on God alone. You see, God has given each of us a vision for our future, just the way he did to Joseph. God has a bigger plan than we can see or understand, and his promises can carry our hope even when we would give up. God tells us this in 1 Corinthians 2:9, "But just as it is written, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard and which have not entered into the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him." And again in Matthew 25:21, at the end of time it says, "His master said to him, 'Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will put you in charge of much. Enter into the joy of your master.'" That's what we got to look forward to, guys. We have joy beyond imagining. God has a richness plan for us for eternity. Paul in Romans 8:18 is trying to express that. He says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed in us." But sometimes our family and friends don't like our God-given dream, our understanding of a God who promised us eternal happiness. So can we choose to focus on God and what he will do in spite of unfair treatment at family and friends? I want you to try something. I'm going to have you all stand up for a minute. Stand up, please. And I want you to imagine that you're alone, so you can't climb on your neighbor to do this, okay? But you're alone. Look up, and about 6 feet above this ceiling is where the edge of the pit is, okay? And it's kind of about 20 feet wide, and it's kind of curls over at the top a little bit, and we're stuck down in here. Now, I want you to show me what you would do if you're in the bottom of the pit. I want you to pantomime trying to climb out of the pit. Everybody ready? Here we go. Yeah, no luck. You may sit down. You're stuck. Yeah, thank you, brother. He's going to give me a hand. This is Reuben. He's coming to bail me out after the other brothers threw me down. There are some places where you get to, guys, that you just can't get out of it on your own. Joseph was stuck in the bottom of a pit, and he was going to die if something didn't change. Let's check in with a speaker I mentioned earlier and see what he will say to these promising young students that are filled with dreams. He makes his way up to the podium, this elderly statesman known as the Lion of the British Empire, Winston Churchill, was about to address the Harrow School where he had attended. He took a breath, fixed his glare on the crowd and began, and when he got to the core of his speech, this is what he said: "Never give in. Never, never, never give in. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. Never give in." This master of public speaking, this man who knew how to motivate, repeated it over and over. Never give in. Never give in. Never give in. He could have said anything. He was leading Europe through the darkest time in their history. He could have encouraged them with stories of valor on the battlefield. He could have encouraged them to remember their family and friends, but instead he said, "Never give in." Joseph, in the pit, may have decided to trust in God. You see, just as God has given us a vision for our future, he had given Joseph a very clear vision as a leader and a ruler. So he knew God would allow him to escape somehow. But before we see how he gets out of the pit, let's talk about this for a minute. So far in the Bible story, there's two sets of characters, right? One of them is Joseph. He's in the pit. The other one is his brothers. They're outside the pit and are planning on leaving him to die. Do you realize it might be better to be in the pit than to be part of the crowd outside the pit? You see, dreaming of another's destruction might not be as bad as absorbing pain yourself. Now the story takes an interesting turn. Perhaps the same brother who had mocked him a little while ago comes back and throws a rope down. And Joseph's curious. He climbs up out of the pit on the rope, and looking around, he spots a caravan. His brother is taking money from the slave trader in the caravan. He is tied up and forced to march through the wilderness several days until he arrives in Egypt. Oh, never give in. Sounds great for a graduation speech. But how about for a young man who's just been sold into slavery? Would he have traded his visions of grandeur, perhaps for freedom and just a ticket home? How about some of us? Are we facing something that we cannot overcome? Is there a family struggle? Is there a health issue? Is there a financial calamity that looks like it's going to take us down? Genesis relates Joseph's sale into captivity this way in Genesis 37:25 through 28. Then they sat down to eat, his brothers. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. And then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. and they took him to Egypt. Verse 36 tells us what happened to Joseph in Egypt. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Wow. Joseph is sold into slavery, and what he chooses to do is be a faithful slave and work as hard as he can for the man who bought him. Joseph's master soon puts him in charge of his entire household. God blesses Joseph, and he does well for him. Things are looking up. Joseph began to see, again, I can accomplish things with God's blessing, even in the midst of a really hard time. Genesis 39, 1 through 3 relates it this way. So Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of the Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all he did to succeed in Joseph's hands. Isn't that cool that God can do that? And then it goes on in verses 4 through 6. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Jacob's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything except what to have for dinner. Wow, cool. Did you catch that, though? It was God who caused Joseph to succeed. Perhaps he isn't the ruler he dreamed he would be, but life is going pretty good. He's managing a rich man's house. And he still has that promise God had given him, but in the midst of the blessing, a little glitch appears. Isn't that often how it is? Pharaoh's wife takes a liking to this handsome slave and starts trying to seduce him. And he won't sleep with her. So she gets angry and bitter, and she accuses him of a crime he did not commit. He gets locked in the king's dungeon. Another dead-end hole in the ground. Now don't miss what happened here. Joseph was standing on principle. He was doing what was right. He was serving the Lord. He was serving his master. And he's falsely accused and thrown into prison. Have you ever been blamed for something when your motives had been pure and you had done what was right? Things can blow up in our face. So we're going to look at how Joseph does in prison, but first I want you to think about what I would think we may read about Joseph in prison. Now that Joseph realizes he's been shafted yet again, he became very bitter. His anger overflowed on all those around him. Eventually, his stewing on the injustices done to him caused him to withdraw from all human relationships. Keeping mainly to himself, with a reputation as someone not to be messed with, Joseph died in that rotten hole years later. No, that's not what he did. That isn't what the word says, but it sure is what I think it would say if it was maybe about me. You see, he had a God-given dream, and he never let go of it. He was faithful in the prison, just in the dungeon, just the way he had been before. Genesis 39, 20 through 23 sums it up this way. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the prisoners who were in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in prison. Whatever was done there, Joseph was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made him succeed. Do any of you have a problem with what this says? Excuse me, it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love? Isn't that a little difficult to stomach? He just got thrown in jail for doing what is right. steadfast. I wanted to look that up. I wanted to understand what it's saying. Firmly loyal or constant, unswerving and faithful. So how can God's love be steadfast if he is allowing all these terrible things in Joseph's life? What is that? Is it possible that sometimes what we think is unfair and damaging is really God humbling us? Could it be that his eternal plan might include some difficulties that would overwhelm us if we don't cling tightly to him and his promises? Do you understand that God is glorified as we, in spite of what we're walking through, hold on to him and receive his comfort? And did you notice God lets him rise to a position of power in the dungeon again? He is learning to be a leader everywhere he goes. You know, as we continue to read this, we start hearing the key character in this story isn't Joseph, it's God. God shows him steadfast love. The Lord makes him successful. And God was with him throughout all the difficulties he encountered. Well, he stays in the dungeon until he has a chance to interpret a dream for two powerful men, one of whom, unfortunately, will be executed and one of whom will be restored to a right-hand man to Pharaoh, most powerful man in the nation. So he interprets the dreams correctly, and he tells the guy who's going to be restored, please remember me to Pharaoh and get me out of here. I didn't do anything wrong. Can you imagine his hope? He's going to get out of there. He's going to be free. This guy's going to be restored. He knows it's true. The official, however, the Bible says, did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Are you kidding me? He had anticipated getting out of prison because of this guy, and now this guy fails him. Has anybody ever failed you? Has anybody ever not told you the truth? Has anybody ever forgotten you? Has anybody ever broken a commitment to you? He was stuck there 2 more years. 730 days after he expected to be released, he's still in prison. Wow, trust in God indeed. If I'd have been Joseph, my thoughts might have gone like this. Let's see, I obeyed my dad, and I was sold into slavery. I obeyed my master, and I was thrown into prison. I correctly interpret a powerful man's dream, and he leaves me here to rot. What kind of life is this anyway? Trust God? Yet most of us know the rest of the story. After 2 years pass, Pharaoh has 2 dreams and he can't figure them out. He can't sort out what's going on. His wise men can't tell him. Nobody can help him with them. And then this right-hand man to the king, this cupbearer, remembers, oh, there was a guy who told me my dreams, Pharaoh. He was amazing, and they both came true. Pharaoh says, get him, and they have to clean him up. He's grubby. He has to shave. He has to get new clothes before he can go before this mighty ruler. He correctly interprets Pharaoh's dream, and he is posted to second in the kingdom only under Pharaoh. Wow. From prisoner to ruler in one giant leap. This is amazing. He stores up food over the next 7 years for the famine that is coming, and then a couple years into the famine, Joseph's brothers show up. Their father had sent them to Egypt to buy food, where Joseph is now ruler over all the stored grain in the known world. And his brothers come before him, and they bow down, just as he had foreseen in his dream. Oh man, this is his opportunity. These are the ones who sold him into slavery and then lied to his father, and now they're here to beg for food? I can make them rue the day they messed with me. I can shame them for what they have done. So let's read how Joseph does handle this in Genesis 45, 4 and 5. So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me, please. And they came near. And he said, I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into Egypt. And now, Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me here before you to preserve life. Wow, amazing. He's already forgiven them. He recognizes that God was in control even when wicked people were acting on him. Even when he was falsely imprisoned, falsely accused, God was with him. The scriptures go on in verses 6 through 8. And Joseph tells his brothers, "For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on the earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, the Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt." So when confronted by these wicked men who tried to kill him, he extends grace and forgiveness. He moves his family to Egypt, where God builds them into a mighty nation. Finally, a story with a happy ending. Looking back, we would all judge Joseph an astounding success. Why? Because throughout his life, he dealt with what was given him in full light of the promises of God. And when given the chance to shatter those who had hurt him, he walked away and blessed them instead. So we also know the end of the story. He did receive all that God had promised him. Can I let you in on a little secret? I know God's promises for you. Think back to these promises of God. I'm going to ask you to stand up again, and we're all going to read together what appears on the screen behind me. I'll turn around so I can make sure I'm with you. That's a cool background on the slide. Thanks, guys. All right, so we are going to read together. So we will have them bring up. The first slide is Psalm 46:1, and we'll go right through them pretty quickly. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Psalm 50:15. And call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. Psalm 147:3. He heals the brokenhearted and binds their wounds. John 16:22. So also you have sorrow now, but I will see you again, and your hearts will rejoice, for no one will take your joy from you. John 16:33. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. And finally, 2 Corinthians 1:2-3. Grace and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort. You may be seated. The God of all comfort. 1 Peter 4:12, 13, and 19, reading from the Message, puts it this way. Friends, when life gets really difficult, don't jump to the conclusion that God isn't on the job. Instead, be glad that you are in the very thick of what Christ experienced. This is a spiritual refining process with glory just around the corner. So if you find life difficult because you're doing what God said, take heart. Trust Him. He knows what He's doing, and He'll keep on doing it. God has promised each of us, if we submit to Him, the crown of eternal life. He walks with us through all we experience on earth, and the question for us this morning is, will we accept with faith His promises? Or will we struggle along in our own strength, relating only by what we see in front of us? You do know God is faithful. And based on his promises, we don't have to quit and give up. Remember, from the time he was 17 and thrown into the pit until he was 30, Joseph went from calamity to calamity to calamity. For 13 long years, there was no sign that his vision would be fulfilled. But don't miss this. God was with Joseph that entire time. God was with Joseph in the pit. He knew what plans he had for him. God was with Joseph as a slave. He had plans to give him a hope and a future. God was with Joseph in the dungeon. His plan wasn't interrupted by a conniving, lying woman. And God was with Joseph in the palace, just as God is with us for eternity when he gives us our reward. Know this, the same God that was with Joseph is with every single one of us. So our choice is, do we wrestle along in our own strength, trying to get control of all those circumstances we don't like? Or do we bless others wherever we find ourselves? This week, if you had your dreams snatched away by your own family and are down in the stinking pits, God knows the plans he has for you. If you escape the pit only to be entrapped in other circumstances, God has a hope and a future for you. If you've been faithful in really hard times only to be blamed wrongly and accused of things you didn't do, know that the God of all comfort is with you. If you've trusted God at people at their word, and they've forgotten you, know that God will never forget you, and he has overcome the world. As we closed, I asked Arlene, I said, what is a physical item that we could give out, that we could take today to help us remember to focus on the promises of God no matter what we do? So you can get your little string out if you got one, and if you didn't, I apologize. I think we were a little bit short. We're blessed to have lots of people here today. So there is, in your little strings, there is 5 different colors, okay? The first one is black, and that's the way life is for some of us some of the time, all of us some of the time. It is difficult. It is sin. It is things that have hurt us from others. It's things we have done that have hurt people. But then comes red. The red is the blood of Jesus Christ. It's what God planned eternally to call us into a relationship with him. And then we have green. Once we've accepted that blood of Christ, we have a new life. We do not have to be bound by black, and we do not have to suffer through our own blood. We have the green for life we have been freely given. And then yellow. The yellow represents those golden promises of God that he has for us and his word that we can cling to. And finally, there's a purple. It's kind of hard to see it as purple if you got old eyes like me, but it's purple. And that purple is for the reality that just as Joseph was a mighty ruler in Egypt, we will be ruling with Christ in the heavenly places for eternity. So take this, think about where you might put it, so that it will remind you there are promises that are greater than whatever you are going to experience and greater than your own ability to get through them. I'm going to ask your head to bow your heads. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes, and we're going to have just a moment of prayer.